Sorry, sis. Your husband likes me more. So I guess he's mine now. These were the words my younger sister, Natalie, said to me 15 years ago when I caught her having an affair with my then husband. My parents' response to my anger was unbelievably shocking. Fast forward 15 years, and out of the blue, Natalie invites me on a trip. No way. Are you still hung up on that? That's hilarious. Knowing you, you probably feel awkward on the trip, so maybe hide in a suitcase, huh? While I listened to her foolish laughter over the phone, I couldn't help but smirk to myself. You really don't know anything, still such a foolish girl. My name is Kingsley, a 42-year-old office worker. This so-called ideal age for marriage is long behind me. I'm what they call a singleton. While my friends are busy with their children, my home is always quiet. Once, I had someone to welcome me home. After all, I'm a divorcee. 15 years ago, I was married. His name was Brooks. Our marriage, which I thought was happy, crumbled within a year. Despite my efforts to balance work and marriage, Brooks apparently felt differently. One day, when I returned from overtime, I found unfamiliar women's shoes at the entrance. Following the sounds to the bathroom, I heard the shower running and recognized the voices of Brooks and a young woman laughing. I burst into the bathroom, shaking with rage, and shouted, "What are you doing?" My face must have looked terrible with anger. Brooks was pale, but Natalie, the woman next to him, looked at me arrogantly. "Wow, you scared me popping in like that. Right, Brookie? It's not what you think, Kingsley. Natalie and I aren't like that." I was furious, not just with Brooks, but also with Natalie, who called him Brookie and showed no remorse. Are you kidding me? A husband showering with his wife's sister. Get dressed. We need to talk. While I glared at them with disgust, Natalie mocked, "Scary as ever, sis." Laughing, I told Natalie, "Do you even realize what you've done? I'm calling our parents." Her cheerful response gave me a headache. It was hard to believe this crazy woman was my sister. While waiting for our parents, she clung to Brooks, taunting me with her laughter. Brooks had resigned himself, confessing to his relationship with Natalie and expressing his desire to divorce me. Knowing that the two had been involved for over 6 months, even though we were only married for about a year, made me feel sick. "Sorry, sis. Your husband likes me more. So I guess he's mine now." The way she referred to Brooks as your husband seemed intentional. Meanwhile, our parents had arrived at our house. When I told them everything, Natalie, "Not again." My dad sighed in disbelief. My mom shockingly suggested I step aside for their happiness, saying, "Well, can't be helped, can it? Brooks must have been lonely. If Natalie is set to marry him, you should wish them well, right, Kingsley?" That's what she said. Brooks, surprised by their reaction, pledged, "I know I've been unfaithful, but I will make Natalie happy." In front of me, the 4 others began to act as if everything was settled, starting a cozy family moment. My boiling anger couldn't be contained anymore. "Don't joke around. I will never forgive you. I'm more than happy to divorce this man. But I will sue you both for damages and make sure you pay." I yelled, breathless. Natalie just sneered, "Greedy for money, huh? How awful to take damages from your own family." I almost lunged at her but stopped myself. She wasn't even worth hitting. The divorce went through, and I got the alimony from both of them. Brooks' parents, unlike him, were sensible. Once they knew the reason for the divorce, they disowned him. They even apologized to me profoundly. Natalie and Brooks, not having enough money, had my parents pay the damages. Months later, they sent me an invitation to their wedding. I immediately tore it up. Growing up, Natalie, being 6 years younger, was always pampered excessively by our parents. It was as if my name had changed to Big Sister. Whenever we fought, I was always the one who got scolded, much to Natalie's delight. She always looked so pleased with herself. "You're the older one, you should be patient." I must have heard those words I hated thousands of times. Unlike me, tall and independent, petite and charming Natalie was always popular. My parents doted on her, treating us very differently. While I was raised to be independent, even being told to go to the doctor alone from around 3rd grade, Natalie would be fussed over for the slightest fever. Early on, I gave up on feeling loved by my parents. Despite everything, I might have secretly hoped back then that our parents would scold Natalie for getting involved with someone else's husband. But after their reaction, I couldn't even cry. For 15 years, I haven't seen my family. Even though I've been asked out, I couldn't bring myself to love someone again. I lived each day fiercely as an independent woman, weathering the storms of life. Now, at my age, I'm financially stable enough to enjoy solo trips and occasional luxuries. But one day, an anonymous call disturbed my peace. "Hello, big sis. It's Natalie. How've you been?" Hearing her voice after 15 years made me emotional. "Why on earth are you calling me now? Are you out of your mind?" Despite my raised voice, Natalie just laughed, still holding a grudge. So gloomy as always. She is in her mid-30s, but Natalie still spoke foolishly, which infuriated me. She mentioned a family trip to a fancy inn, arranged by her, but my parents wanted me to come too. Mom and Dad want to apologize for everything. Lucky you. But Brooks will be there too. If it's awkward for you, maybe hide in a suitcase, haga. Mocking me with her laughter, she suggested that. After a moment's thought, I agreed to go, and smirked to myself. On the day, as headed to the meeting place on the station platform, there was a conspicuous group that people on the street glanced at. "What is it?" I looked at them, and I couldn't help but exclaim, "Wow, that's intense." The last time I saw her, Natalie was barely in her 20s, but now she's nearing 40. There she was, still standing in a miniskirt like she used to, showing her bare legs, making me smile wryly. Despite the passing years making it harder to defy age, she had slightly darkened knees and a fuller figure. Her first words to me were, "Not as aged as I expected, but your clothes are a bit drab, huh?" While riding the train, I thought, I don't want to hear that from you. Meeting my parents after so long, they briefly greeted me and continued their merry conversation without me. Brooks, feeling awkward, avoided eye contact with me. Was she planning to stay for a week after just one night? I was surprised to see that Natalie brought a suitcase big enough for a week's stay, filled with only clothes and beauty products. Choosing outfits and shoes based on my mood is classy. But you wouldn't understand that. Arriving at the inn, the elegance of the well-known luxury establishment and its staff was apparent. In that scene, Natalie's outfit stood out even more. "Thank you as always, Mr. White. White is our family name. That's so cool, getting recognized in such an inn. Makes me proud as his daughter." When Natalie learned that our dad was a regular, she suddenly changed her attitude towards the staff. "Hurry up and carry the bags. I'm tired." I had no intention of sharing a hot spring with Natalie and Mom, so I enjoyed a private bath alone. Hot springs are truly the best, but people really don't change easily. I smiled to myself, lost in thought. After the bath, during a quiet dinner, Natalie snuggled up to Brooks. "Big sis, you should be more grateful to our parents. You'd never get to experience such an inn with your lifestyle. Unlike you, we travel with them once a year, right, Brooks?" "Doh, that's nice," I responded nonchalantly. Annoyed, she retorted, "It's your inappealing attitude that got you cheated on. Why don't you pay for this yourself? Though, a perpetual mid-level employee like you couldn't afford it." Natalie's laughter was unstoppable for me too. "Can't afford it, you say? Are you talking about yourself? Someone who's never worked or earned her own money, acting all high and mighty?" "Don't worry, I always intended to pay for my part. Though, should I specify only my part?" I sneered and glanced at our parents. "Well, I'm done with my meal and leaving now. We won't meet again, so enjoy yourselves." As I stood up, Natalie shouted, "Just go. We don't need a gloomy woman like you around." Ignoring her parting shot, I was settling the bill at the front desk, and then my mom said, "Wait, what do you mean, Kingsley?" They must have rushed over, my parents' hair disheveled and faces panicked, followed by Natalie and Brooks. What are you talking about? I don't understand." I spoke coldly, knowing I'd never see them again. "Forget her. Let's go back and drink. Some people never change." Such an uncharming woman. My ex-husband, Brooks, compared me to Natalie. My parents seemed too flustered to respond, just managing an awkward Behind my foolish parents, I decided to enlighten the two clueless people glaring at me. "Do you know what these people said to me on the train when you all left the seats? They wanted me to pay for the entire stay here. It's laughably presumptuous. I couldn't help but laugh, seeing my parents' faces turn red. What? That's impossible. We're wealthy, and they even give us financial support every month. Natalie protested, claiming that I'm lying. Support? Are you beggars? You really don't know anything. The wealth was a long time ago. They are so pretentious and foolish. They got into debt, and last month, they finally declared personal bankruptcy. Didn't Aunt tell you? I spoke condescendingly. My parents hung their heads in silence, realizing the truth when they saw that Natalie and Brooks turned pale. Well, it's none of my business. I said that, and then I told the staff. The meal was delicious. I can't wait to see how it changes with the seasons on my next visit. I smiled to them, and the staff responded, "We're grateful for your patronage, Ms. White." The four of them were surprised to see my friendly exchange with the staff. In fact, this wasn't my first visit here. I'm actually a regular here, coming 4 times a year. I was surprised when Natalie mentioned this place. "How can someone like you afford such an expensive inn?" she exclaimed loudly, so I said to her, "The weaker the dog, the louder it barks. So annoying." "And Natalie, you're mistaken. I'm actually running a company, dealing internationally. I do have the means. I established my company with some friends shortly after divorcing Brooks 15 years ago. We import and sell home goods. It was shaky at first, but it's been profitable for years now. Funnily enough, part of the capital came from the alimony. Life is unpredictable, but I've built a decent life on my own." Joining this ridiculous trip was to show them my success, a best revenge. Seeing their foolish faces was somewhat satisfying. That alone lifted my spirits a bit. I'll never forgive them though. They probably didn't know I was a business owner. Yet, they expected me to pay the full amount of $1,500 per person per night from the start. My parents have always been excessively soft on Natalie, which is almost impressive in its own way. I've told my aunt, who always worried about me since I was young, to only call me for funerals. Well, my taxi's here, so I'm heading home. That's $6,000 for the 4 of you. Make sure you pay it all. Bye now. I got into the taxi and told the driver to head out. Looking back, I couldn't help but laugh at the sight of the 4 of them standing at the inn's entrance, mouths agape, watching my taxi. The driver asked me, "Did something good happen, ma'am?" "Can you tell?" "I'm in a great mood," I replied with a smile. A few days later, I was on the phone with my friend. "Wait, what did you just say?" The whole situation was so ridiculous, I couldn't stop laughing. Yay, those people insisted they couldn't pay and kept saying to wait for Kingsley to come back. How can they be so arrogant without a dime? That was Alia, a friend who works at that inn. Her being there is one of the reasons I use that inn. Ahaha, I've blocked them, so no chance of that. After Natalie called from a private number, I set my personal phone to block calls from non-contacts. I got rid of their contacts 15 years ago. I plan to change my phone number soon. One can never be too careful with crazy people. I've also had my address registration restricted for a long time. Alia continued to amuse me. We're used to dealing with odd customers, but wait, I can't stop laughing now that I remember. As Alia laughed over the phone, I doubled over in laughter myself. Apparently, they returned to the room briefly, and then the 3 of them came back to the lobby. When Alia asked about the 4th person, "What are you talking about? It's always been the 3 of us." "That's right, look properly." They started making a scene. Brooks was red-faced and kept his head down. They left a bunch of clothes, shoes, and beauty products in the room, claiming it was all my forgotten items when pointed out. The inn finally had enough and threatened to call the police, which made them pale. And where was Natalie found? I've worked here for years, but I've never seen anyone hide in a suitcase to dodge the bill. Continuing to laugh, I apologized for the trouble and promised to visit again. "Don't worry, I doubt you'll see anyone that crazy again." My parents had called all the relatives, but no one helped, probably because they already owed them money. Even trying to pay by card was impossible. Our parents had no credit cards due to their bankruptcy. In the end, they started arguing. "Do you know how much we've done for you?" "I don't care about that," Natalie snapped back. Eventually, Brooks, the only one with a card, had to settle the bill for all four. But not without exceeding the limit on one card. "You guys are a joke," he exploded, despite having enjoyed their indulgence all this time. Thinking back, I'm genuinely glad I divorced such a person. I heard their marriage soured after this incident, and Brooks found another woman and disappeared. Natalie returned to our parents' house on the condition she would work, but she's the same person who lazed around at home after graduating high school. I wouldn't hire someone in their mid-30s with no job history and a difficult personality. Let her struggle all she wants from now on. Speaking of which, Natalie, you told me to hide in a suitcase, and then you end up doing it. What a contortionist, I chuckled at the thought. I don't think I'll ever marry again. I enjoy my work more than anything, and my employees are like family to me. Blood isn't everything. Parents should realize it's wrong to expect unconditional love and obedience just because someone is their child, but they probably never will. They're no concern of mine. All right, let's get to work. I clapped my hands to my cheeks to psych myself up and started humming as I began my morning routine. Right now, I'm living the most fulfilling days of my life. I wonder if it's a thief. I frowned at the sight of a pair of men's and women's shoes in the entrance. No one is supposed to be in the house, with neither me or my husband around. Yet, there were signs of someone both at the entrance and in the bathroom. The indelicate sounds coming from the bathroom made it clear someone was enjoying themselves. It's common for husbands to invite their mistresses over when their wives are away. But that's impossible. That voice, could it be? Because my husband was standing next to me, staring at the bathroom with a pale face. My name is Emily. It's been 2 years since I married Jack. Both of us work so we don't have kids yet. However, I think we are living a peaceful and harmonious life, going out or traveling on our days off. Fortunately, neither our parents nor our in-laws rush us for grandchildren. On the contrary, since both our parents live in the same city as us, we have a good relationship, often gathering for family dinners. The slightly old but splendid house we rented was recommended to us by my in-laws. The dinners happen almost once a month, mostly at our place. My mother and I cook, and we enjoy the time with my father's favorite wine and appetizers brought by my in-laws. That day, my mother came over in the morning to prepare for the dinner. But her usually bright expression seemed off. As she chopped the ingredients, she worriedly muttered things like, "Do we really need this much? Or maybe it's too much to eat," which she doesn't usually say. "Mom, what's wrong? We've prepared just about the same amount as usual, right?" When I bravely asked her that, she looked at me as if she just realized something. She laughed it off with an he. "Sorry, dear. Your father has been eating less lately, so I got worried." "Oh, really? Is Dad not feeling well somewhere?" My father was self-employed from a young age, and is still actively running his company, an entrepreneur. He's always put work first, and I barely have memories of playing with him on his days off. Even so, as a daughter, I'm worried if he's overworked himself, causing his health to deteriorate. My mother seemed hesitant to say more, but perhaps thinking it cruel to worry me needlessly, she finally opened up. "It's not like he's sick. Your father is perfectly healthy. But lately, he's been cold. He finds problems with the dinner or comments that my clothes are drab. That's awful. To say such things to Mom, he was always there supporting him at home. It's all right. Maybe Dad is just tired from starting a new venture recently." My mother insisted she was fine and wouldn't hear otherwise. The conversation drifted, and I returned to cooking without a sense of closure. Today, I plan to lay out a feast on the table, including my father's favorites like steak and fried chicken, to cheer him up for his new business venture. As for what my husband was doing, he has a penchant for cleanliness that extends to cleaning every nook and cranny of a house. Even if it's just family, he meticulously cleans the entrance and living room whenever we have guests. He even started tidying up the garden planters when my father and in-laws arrived. "Emily dear, can I have a moment?" "No, Mill." I was checking the temperature of the oil as I got ready to fry the chicken, when my Mill, with a somewhat grim expression, popped into the kitchen. She handed me a box without a word, which seemed to be a gift, and I accepted it, puzzled. To my surprise, the box bore the mark of a restaurant famous for its fried chicken. They went out of their way to make the trip to the restaurant. The savory aroma was appetizing, but it seems we've accidentally prepared the same dish. However, I simply thought to myself that I just need to fry less than planned. It's not uncommon to accidentally bring the same thing. Well, did you go out of your way to buy this? It's a celebration, after all. But you could have mentioned you were making fried chicken. This is a bit awkward. Can we just serve the fried chicken I bought as a gift today? Huh. But you have Jack, so the two of you can enjoy your fried chicken, right? We're not young anymore, so too much fried food can upset our stomachs. I couldn't argue with that. As hardworking as our parents are, they're all approaching 60. The effort my mother put into preparing the fried chicken will go to waste, but it would be a shame to serve too much fried food and have leftovers. You should have told me earlier, dear. What an inconsiderate daughter-in-law you are. I was taken aback by the words my mill dropped as she left. However, she didn't notice my surprise and left the kitchen with the fried chicken. This was the first time she had made such a snide remark. We had never double-checked with each other on what we're bringing for dinner before. If there was the same thing, it usually turned into a joke. Moreover, all the dishes until now were sweets or meat. It was the first time she brought something pre-cooked with a close expiration date. I felt that it was odd, but thought maybe she was upset because it was a somewhat expensive dish, so I didn't dwell on it too deeply. At dinner, my father was thrilled with the expensive restaurant's fried chicken. My mother, catching my eye, seemed to understand the situation and pretended to be happy without mentioning the fried chicken we prepared. The ingredients left in the fridge were skillfully turned into a stew by my mother after we sent my in-laws and father home. Luckily, it hadn't been fried yet. Fried chicken would have been fine. You both might get tired of eating the same thing, right? Turning it into a stew would make it easier to take it home with us. My mother divided some of the stew into containers to take home. I felt guilty, but indeed, this stew she made was delicious, and my husband and I quickly finished it off. Later, I heard that despite it being such a tasty stew, my father had complained about it being an old-fashioned taste while having it with his drink. I was incredibly frustrated, but my mother just gave a wry smile, and I was left holding on to my irritation. A few weeks after that dinner, my husband, who was supposed to be on an overnight business trip, suddenly contacted me. The trip was cancelled due to the other party's circumstances. He said he would be coming home as usual today. I had planned to spend some time at my parents' since he was supposed to be away for about 3 days. However, the change of plans meant contacting my mother about the schedule change. I finished shopping as usual and met up with my husband. Then we headed home together. Did I forget to turn off the lights? I thought I turned them off. As we arrived home, there was a stream of light coming from under the door. I was sure I had turned off all the lights when I left, so why was it on? What a waste of electricity, I apologized, but my husband just laughed and said, "Don't worry about it," as he inserted the key into the door, then fell silent. What's wrong? The door, it's unlocked. At my husband's grave words, I too sharply inhaled. It could be a thief. I quietly turned on my smartphone and started recording. As I nodded to signal him, my husband slowly opened the door. Whose shoes are these? At the entrance, there was a pair of men's leather shoes and a pair of women's low-heeled pumps. My husband's remark made it clear these shoes belonged to someone we didn't know. If these had been my husband's, he wouldn't be here right now. I would have thought my husband was cheating with another woman, but he's right here beside me. Naturally, we concluded that someone unknown to us was in our house. Seeing my reaction, my husband took his umbrella from the stand, ready to swing it as he moved forward. Then, we noticed the living room lights were on, and it appeared someone had scattered takeout food across the table. It was odd for a burglar. Then we heard voices. Approaching slowly, the voices seemed to come from the bathroom. The muffled voices suggested that the person was inside the bathroom. This is weird. I could understand why my husband was thoroughly creeped out. After all, the voices coming from inside were quite inappropriate. It's unsettling and infuriating to know that your home is being used for an affair without your knowledge. Wondering who in the world would do such a thing, we slowly opened the bathroom door, and the sight of discarded clothes caught our eye. Well, I couldn't help but exclaim. Because there, unmistakably, were my father's clothes. The large jacket, carefully hung on a hanger, was his favorite one he wore to our last family dinner. The casually discarded t-shirts and pants were all too familiar as well. I had just parted ways with my mother a few hours ago. She couldn't possibly be here. My father was cheating with a woman in his daughter's house. I frowned at the thought. Wondering how to explain this to my husband, I looked up to find him staring at a necklace on the sink counter, his face pale. That necklace, and the earrings next to it, I remembered seeing them recently. No way, Mom. My husband's words confirmed who was in the bath. The ones using our house for their affair were my father and my mill. Pulling my husband's arm, who seemed ready to confront them, we quietly went back to the living room. It seemed we regained a bit of calm after moving away from the echoing voices. Shouldn't we call your mom and my dad? However, my husband seemed confused as he said this. What would happen if we called my mother and his father here now? I could only foresee a crisis that might tear the family apart, but we couldn't just overlook this. The voices of enjoyment continued from the bathroom. They might not come out for another few minutes. I contacted my mother, and my husband reached out to his father right then and there. About Dad. Dad, he said he was going golfing today and left in the morning. He won't be back until tonight. Should I tell him to call you when he gets back? It seems Dad is here, with Jack's mom. I couldn't bring myself to speak of what was happening in the bathroom, but that was enough for my mother to understand. With a stern voice, she said, "I'm coming over right away," and hung up. Less than 10 minutes later, my pale-faced mother and my confused-looking Phil arrived. The voices had stopped, but they were still in the bath. We could hear the shower, but at least they weren't making as much noise for it to echo through the hallway as before. "Jack, what do you mean Mom is here? I told you, she went on a day trip with the ladies and won't be back until tonight," my Phil asked frantically, still confused as to what was going on. We had told him that my mill was with my father, but either he was too confused or didn't want to accept it, desperately avoiding looking towards the bathroom. My husband signaled me, and I started recording on my smartphone again. Once the recording started, my husband, making no attempt to hide, rushed into the bathroom. "Hey! What are you doing in our house?" My husband forcefully opened the bathroom door, the door making a dull sound. From inside, the screams of my father and my mill echoed, followed by the angry shouting between my father and husband. My husband, who seemed to forcefully open the door, was snarling in a low voice, full of disgust. I grabbed a bath towel and threw it into the bathroom. I didn't want to see the two of them naked. Behind me, my mother, who apparently couldn't hold back any longer, pushed past me and rushed into the bathroom. Then, pushing aside my husband and my mill, she shouted in a rage like I had never heard before, and forcibly dragged my father out of the bath. Finally gathering his courage, my Phil followed my mother into the bathroom and dragged my mill out. Then, the two of them hastily dressed in their discarded clothes and, without even drying their hair, sat down in the hallway. In just a matter of minutes, all of us, including myself, were out of breath from all the commotion. My mother's thin voice asked, "Why?" and that started the chain of excuses from my father and mill. It all began with my mill's love at first sight. My father was a business owner with impressive work connections. Always dressed impeccably, making him seem like a stylish and sophisticated man, a bit like the fashionable dads that were popular a while ago. My mill had fallen for him right from the start. It started from the moment our families met for Jack's and my wedding preparations. My mill took the initiative to organize dinner parties, pretending to be a gracious woman, and got closer and closer to my father. At one of those dinner parties, she finally confessed her feelings. By this point, my husband was glaring at his own mother, looking like he might throw up, but the problem also lay with my father. He was drawn to my mill, who flirted wearing makeup and flashy clothes, compared to my mother, who was devoted to her family. However, both of them had families. My father worked alongside my mother in the same company, and when he had days off, it often coincided with my FIL's days off too. Thus, they needed a place to meet. That's where our house came into the picture. Jack and I enjoyed taking short trips and staying in hotels during long weekends. My mill would say things like, "It's careless to leave the house empty for too long, I'll go check on it," to confirm our absence, and then would contact my father. We naively informed them whenever we were leaving the house, making it easy for them to use it. We thought we were safe since we didn't give them a spare key, but it turns out they secretly made a copy during one of the dinner parties. Moreover, they made sure to leave no trace of their presence. They brought their own food, collected all garbage, cleaned the hair from the drain after using the bath, and wiped down any water droplets in the bathroom before leaving. This time, my father contacted my mill after learning I was supposed to be at my parents' house because of my husband's business trip. I had only told my mother about the change of plans, leading to their unfortunate encounter. If it weren't for this incident, who knows how long they would have continued deceiving us. Naturally, both were confronted with divorce and a hefty alimony demand from their spouses, as well as estrangement from Jack and me. Although my father and my mill admitted to their actions initially, they began to claim our accusations were baseless days later. Thankfully, I had recorded everything on my smartphone, which, when presented as evidence, helped facilitate the divorce proceedings smoothly through the lawyers. Jack and I used the alimony to move into another apartment. My usually germophobic husband has developed a complete trauma of that bathroom, refusing to go near it. I, too, found it painful to continue living in a house that had been used for their rendezvous, so moving was a relief. Now, my mother, who has no feelings left towards my father, lives with us. After the divorce was finalized, my mill seemed overly pleased. She had adopted a defiant attitude halfway through, and perhaps because my father was a business owner, she readily accepted the alimony demand. She moved in with my father right after the divorce, and they got married, settling into what seemed like an easy life as an entrepreneur's wife. However, their plans fell through when his new business venture faltered, and the company's performance rapidly deteriorated. My mother just nodded as if it was to be expected. Who do you think was managing his one-man show? Indeed, it was my mother who had patiently dealt with those inside and outside the company disgruntled by my father's overbearing attitude, silently supporting the business. Much of the company's accounting and dealings with business partners were handled by my mother. Naturally, she resigned at the same time as the divorce. Agreeing to her resignation, or rather my father was in a hurry to push her out, this sudden change resulted in a lack of a proper handover of duties. As a result, he was left with employees who were dissatisfied with him, leading to a series of resignations as others followed my mother's exit, creating a shortage of staff. My father, who had always believed it was a wife's duty to support him, naturally expected my mill to take over. However, my mill had been a homemaker all her life and knew nothing about running a company, proving to be of no help. The cause of the mass resignations was soon revealed to be due to the president's divorce scandal, and clients began withdrawing from my father's company, citing poor performance. My father's company didn't last 6 months before going bankrupt. Their house and possessions were seized, and the couple, burdened with a massive debt including unpaid wages, managed to flee to a public housing complex, starting a meager life. Given his age, my father tried to find work in a company that would treat him as a president, making it impossible to secure a new job. Naturally, he remained unemployed, indulging in gambling to relieve stress. Not satisfied with just that, he blamed my mill for their misfortune, claiming, "If you hadn't seduced me, none of this would have happened," and started physically abusing her. My mill tried to support him with her part-time job, but was disappointed by his gambling addiction and constant spending of their living expenses. She couldn't stand his constant verbal abuse, and one day ran away from the public housing. She ended up at my FIL's house, the home where my husband was raised. My husband and I happened to be visiting my Phil. He had become quite reclusive after the divorce, and we often checked on him. When the front door opened without the doorbell ringing, we went to see who it was and was reunited with my mill. At first, we didn't recognize her. She looked so different, it was as if a stranger, an old lady, had approached us. The once beautifully made-up mill was nowhere to be seen. The worn-out woman in front of us desperately apologized, hoping for forgiveness for everything that had happened, but I couldn't help but feel bitter. My Phil must have been deeply shocked, yet it seemed he was somewhat swayed by the return of the woman he once loved. While we were contemplating how to ask her to leave, my husband suddenly covered his mouth and collapsed to the ground, vomiting. The memories of his mother's indecent acts in the bathroom overwhelmed him, and he couldn't bear it, vomiting right there. Rushing to bring him a trash can and water, my Phil and I ended up listening to my husband's cries rejecting his biological mother. Feeling sorry for my husband, it was my Phil who stood up to resolve the situation. He firmly looked at my Mill in the eyes and completely denied any possibility of reconciliation. "Leave," he said, firmly kicking her out of the house. My Mill was apparently deeply affected by being so detested by her own son to the point that he vomited. She left without saying a word, staggering out of the front door. Since then, my Mill has not approached my FIL's house. We haven't heard from my father or my Mill since then, and it's safe to assume our ties with them have been completely severed. My husband took a few days to recover but is gradually getting back to normal. Together, we're working hard to build a warm family of our own. My mother is resilient, quickly finding work and making new friends, seemingly forgetting my father and living happily. We're hoping to get her an apartment near our home once we save a bit more money. As for my Phil, adopting a stray cat that wandered into his yard has brought some cheer to his life, much to our relief. Apparently, taking in one cat has led to more cats gathering in his yard. Recently, it has become a well-known gathering spot for cats in the neighborhood. The scandal involving my father and my Mill turned into a massive ordeal for our entire family. However, for those of us who remain together, we have strengthened our bonds and are doing our best to overcome this together. My name is Caroline, and I'm 49 years old. I have been married to my husband, Carter, for 20 years now, and last year, when our son left home to go to college outside of the prefecture, I had more free time to spend. However, I still have to send him money for his expenses, so I decided to start working part-time. Since I've been a housewife since our son was born, I initially struggled with many aspects of the job, but lately, I've been feeling a sense of accomplishment as my opinions are being valued at work. "Hey Carter," they said they might raise my hourly wage a bit. "It feels good to be recognized for my hard work," I said with enthusiasm as I talked to Carter, who was watching TV absent-mindedly. And then, he suddenly asked, "So, does that mean you can live on your own now?" Suddenly, my husband asked something completely nonsensical. "Huh?" I responded, thinking it might be a misunderstanding due to his casual tone. He turned towards me and continued speaking, "It's perfect timing. I've been meaning to tell you." My husband's smirk gave me an uneasy feeling. "I've got myself a lovely girlfriend. You're no longer needed." His unexpected words left me stunned. "Get the divorce and marriage certificates from the city office tomorrow." He said it without a care in the world. It was so abrupt that I couldn't make sense of it. What do you mean?" I asked. He wanted a divorce because he had a girlfriend. He planned to remarry with new girlfriend. As the situation became clearer, I felt my body trembling. My husband chuckled at my reaction. "I can still live as a man, unlike you who's been avoiding me for ages. Besides, our physical relationship has been non-existent for a long time, so there's no point in being together anymore." His disrespectful remarks were infuriating. It's true that we haven't had a husband-wife relationship for a long time, but that doesn't mean I've given up on being a woman. In fact, I'd rather not be reminded of my 50-year-old, out-of-shape husband and his male desires. I felt a surge of anger and, inexplicably, burst into laughter. "You're tired, busy, and a hassle. All you ever say are those things, and you've been avoiding me. Wanting to live as a man now is just a joke." Suddenly, my husband's expression turned stern. "What's so funny? Don't mess around, old lady." He used rough and offensive language. Then he crossed his arms, slumped down, and said, "Off. You're so different from Ayla. She's head over heels in love with me. She's bragging that I'm the best boyfriend she's ever had. What about you, on the other hand? Erase. You're so happy about such a little thing, aren't you?" Carter seemed eager to boast about his mistress, Ayla, and looked down on me. "Gayla. That's her name. Gayla Ayla. She's not a snail." And then, Carter went on to proudly describe Ayla's background. "She's in her mid-20s, more than a decade younger than him. And she's pregnant with his child." Nowadays, age-difference marriages are not uncommon, but for a parent with an almost 20-year-old son to have a child with a woman who is not much older than his child, I felt like going crazy with disgust. "In life, you need love," he said. Rather than being frozen and covered in mold like you need love that's as fresh as freshly made dough, just like Ayla's smooth and radiant skin. Otherwise, it's not worth spending money on. My husband, Carter, was talking rapidly with a rolled tongue. Oh, so it's basically affection bought with money, huh? Ignoring his own aging, he's choosing a young and fresh girl. I see. You switched to a girl with no morals who's fine with cheating on a married man for money, I pointed out. When I pointed this out, my husband said, "It's not about money. I'm telling you it's about love." He spat at me and got angry. Anyway, I'm serious. I need to marry Ayla as soon as possible to put my mind at ease. You should pack your bags and leave. Well, he certainly listed everything in his favor. I was speechless with astonishment. At the same time, I found it somewhat ridiculous. After all, how long had it been since this man used the word love with me? I'm sure that girl, Ayla, will stop showing any reaction after a while. Over time, along with aging, such fleeting emotions would surely fade away. Rather than that, the terrible words my husband is throwing at me now will be directed at a woman named Ayla next. Really, you're quite pathetic. I should have realized it before we got married. Come to think of it, I've been handling all the household chores and childcare by myself. Instead of lending a helping hand, my husband began to criticize me constantly, saying I haven't done this or that. Even though it was the era when such remarks were considered normal, there wasn't a single word of love or appreciation. And now, he's using me up, tossing me aside, and switching to a younger woman. I could hardly believe it was insane. But Carter seemed to take my words as a sore loser and said, "Well, then, there is no problem between us. Anyway, I'll fill out the form on my next day off. Just make sure you have both of them ready." He left me alone and went back to his room. For the next few days, I had sleepless nights and my tears of regret wouldn't stop. Still, outwardly, I pretended to remain unfazed. On the next holiday, my husband had invited his affair partner to our house. "Hello there, Carter's old wife. I've come to help with the paper war." Sitting on the sofa with a humming tune, the woman named Ayla crossed her legs high. She had soft skin and confident appearance, clearly felt good about herself. Given her profession, her makeup was flashy, and her clothes were excessively revealing, with the design exposing her cleavage. Her tight skirt was so mini that even I, as a woman, felt unsure where to look. But I felt that she didn't really love my husband. My intuition told me that her purpose was surely. I had already prepared myself for divorce, so I faced her. I didn't intend to resist, but her words and actions bothered me. "So, your name is Ayla, right? Did you start dating Carter knowing he's a married man? Calling me Carter's old wife means you both understand each other's positions, right?" She laughed and said, "I'm not dumb, you know. Don't underestimate me, old lady. You're the one who's about to be discarded. I'm going to be Carter's wife from now on. It's an easy deal, isn't it?" "I see. I'm glad you answered so clearly. I even recorded this conversation. So, you know that I can also claim alimony from you, right?" I showed them the recorder I was using to tape this conversation. She sighed with annoyance and complained to my husband, "Carter, I thought you said your wife wouldn't interfere. This isn't what we agreed on." My husband tried to calm her down, saying, "Don't worry. I've thought about it, right, Ayla? No need to get so angry." Carter, Ayla. Their conversation was truly cringeworthy. As I frowned, my husband brought out some documents. "Write the divorce papers with these conditions." The document listed conditions for divorce, including alimony and pension division. "What? You're giving this old lady $30 million. That'll reduce my share, won't it?" Without me having to investigate further, she candidly exposed her farts. "It'll reduce," she repeated. I was sure of it. Her goal was my husband's inheritance, which he was currently in the process of inheriting from his real father. Well, Ayla, this includes our son's child support, you know." In his eyes, his wife's blatant reluctance even seemed cute as he tried to soothe her. "It's like a severance payment, huh? Expensive, isn't it?" I struggled to contain my peak of anger. Nevertheless, I was convinced that my intuition was right and added, "If the terms of the divorce can be documented in a notarized agreement, then this is fine. Also, I would like the payment to be made in one lump sum." I kept my response to the minimum, and Carter, aware that the conversation was being recorded, agreed to the terms. Are you satisfied now? During the exchange with my husband, that woman, who had been looking bored, urged us to finish filling out the divorce papers. Old lady, you have to move out of here by the end of the month, okay? I'm going to cancel the lease at the place I'm living now. I'll leave once the notarized agreement is ready and the divorce papers are filed, I replied. Upon hearing this, the woman, who seemed ready to move in immediately, grumbled with dissatisfaction and reluctantly left. Eventually, the notarized agreement was finalized, and Carter and I were divorced. Then, as if she had been waiting, that woman came to kick me out. Come on, hurry up, don't dawdle, get out, she said with glee. He, ha, the cheerful woman continued. I just filed the marriage certificate. Now I'm Carter's wife. This fabulous house is mine. I reluctantly handed her the keys to the front door as she was jumping with joy. At that time, I was curious, so I asked, isn't Carter about the same age as your parents? If you call me an old lady, then Carter, who is older than me, is an old man. Why did you choose such a person as your marriage partner? Her blunt answer matched my expectations perfectly. Carter is a division manager at a top tire company. This house is a recently renovated property near a station. It's a pretty stylish single-family home. I'll replace the furniture to my liking. She was daydreaming. Carter treats me like a princess. He's not handsome and a bit old, but he says he'll buy me anything I want. She mocked me, looking triumphant as if to say her future was secured. Hope everything goes as you wish. With a sigh, I left the house I had lived in for many years. I moved to a dormitory of a certain university. I was hired as a live-in dorm mother, which is very rare nowadays. Actually, I had been working part-time at a company cafeteria. When I explained to my employer that I wanted to make a fresh start after leaving Carter and start on my own in a different place, my boss, who appreciated my usual work ethic, contacted the head office. The dormitory position had just become available due to an employee's retirement, and I gratefully accepted it. I was really glad I had gotten my nutritionist certification. The rent and utilities were super cheap. Although I didn't have much free time to go out, it was a comfortable and enjoyable workplace. About 3 months into this new life, I received a call from my ex-husband. Mom's in trouble. Can you help with her care? He asked. Which nerve to say such a thing? We're strangers now. It's your wife's job to take care of her. I pointed out, stating the obvious. He responded, Ayla is pregnant. Mom seems to have dementia and throws things, so it's dangerous. So, it's okay for her to throw things at me. What a logic. Absolutely not. Don't call me anymore. We're done. I firmly rejected him. I had been in touch with my mother-in-law for 20 years since my marriage, but we never had a close relationship. And now, just starting to live independently, I couldn't afford to care for someone else. But Carter somehow found out where I was and came to see me with that woman. It's hopeless. If you can't provide care, then return the alimony you were paid, he said, making an absurd demand. I don't think I have any obligation to comply with such a request, I replied coldly, pushing him away, only to be met with a fierce glare from that woman. Old lady, you knew and tricked us. We were counting on an inheritance that turned out to be non-existent, and instead, we found a mountain of debt, she yelled, scattering papers everywhere. Tricking you. That's a terrible thing to say. You just assumed Carter had wealth. I sighed deliberately. Indeed, when I was handling the inheritance procedures for my late father-in-law, I discovered he had a significant amount of debt. If that was all, just renouncing the inheritance would have been enough. However, Carter had canceled his father's cell phone plan and sold off household items and jewelry for cash before the procedures. There's a law that if you handle any property before the inheritance renunciation procedures, you can't renounce it, and that's exactly what happened. As a result, the debt fell squarely on Carter and that woman. I triumphantly said, Carter dumped the tedious inheritance procedures on me and didn't bother to ask anything about them. That's because, Ayla, he needed money to continue his affair with you and touched the estate for that very reason. That's something you should have clearly stated. Carter protested, but that's exactly my line. You didn't ask when you should have. Now both of you have to take responsibility. What? I didn't know about this, I wasn't told. She panicked, her face pale. So, you plan to just take the money and run, huh? They approached me aggressively, but that's not my problem. You make such a silly point. If you hadn't cheated on me, you wouldn't have had to make money for your mistress, and you could have disinherited it. You definitely caused this situation. Gah. He groaned and stepped back. You knew he was married, Ayla, and still pursued a relationship for his assets, even going as far as to have a child and kick me out. You desired this situation and put yourself here. I lectured her, almost old enough to be her mother. If I knew it would come to this, I wouldn't want such an old man. But I still had something to say. Do you remember the notarized agreement from our divorce? I received alimony, pension division, and child support from Carter. But I can also demand alimony from you. What? You're saying $30,000 isn't enough? That's just greedy. She screamed in disbelief and hurled insults at me. Well, I was going to forget about it if you guys would just leave me alone now that I'm no longer relevant. But you keep coming up with nonsensical theories, demanding that I take care of your mother, or return the alimony that you paid, and all sorts of other unreasonable things. I've lost my patience with you. When I revealed that I had recorded our divorce terms discussion and was serious about demanding alimony, she ran away without looking back. While watching her leave, I turned back to Carter, who was still standing there in shock. I wonder if someone in the late stages of pregnancy can run like that. Is she really pregnant? And where's the love after she just ran off? At my question, Carter gasped. I was wrong. Please come back. He begged tearfully, suddenly looking much older. Not a chance. Please leave. Kaoroli Inye. He cried out pitifully, but after everything he had done, I felt no sympathy. As I expected, that woman left the divorce papers and disappeared, apparently lying about the pregnancy. Carter now shoulders the debt and the care of his mother alone, worn down by stress and overwork. I find that taking care of children around the same age as my son as a dorm mother suits me well, and lately I've been getting compliments about looking younger. I plan to continue living honestly, without arrogance or foolish parts. Everyone, be careful when it comes to divorce.